Tips Analysis. I hope you're feeling positive because this is the Introverted Positron, and welcome back to Tips Analysis. So, the Game Awards have come and gone. As much as there were exciting announcements and stuff like that, the awards themselves were fine. But that's not really the focus of today's conversation. Today, when we come around these kinds of times where we're talking about what makes a good game and what makes a bad game, and this game wins this award and that game wins that award, and all that kind of stuff, it brings up questions about these kinds of things, and I think a question that I really want to focus on for today is one that I've been thinking about since the Game Awards, and it's a common one that pops up all the time when you're in the gaming community, when you're talking to people about games who are really into them, and that's the question of graphics versus gameplay. Now, I don't want to get too in-depth into it. I'm not, generally speaking, somebody who takes sides on those things. I do have an opinion on this one, but a lot of those kinds of things I don't take a real side in it. I don't think one's necessarily trumps the other in every aspect. I think that they're both very important parts to games. I think they're both key parts to what makes a game interesting and good. But I want to talk about the key features of it. Which one do I believe and which one do you believe matters more is kind of what I'm going to get into in this. And of course, there's kind of two different perspectives we have to look at this from, because gaming itself is something that's an expanding medium, really. It's some people say it's dying. I think it's changing, and I think it's changing ultimately for the better. Not that certain things would indicate that, but nonetheless, I think that overall gaming is becoming a much more accepted medium, a much wider medium for things that it can do. And that's kind of what we want to do. Is I want to talk about games as a form of entertainment, and games as a form of artistic creation, as a form of media and of communicating ideas and interesting ways to kind of expand upon those ideas and demonstrate those ideas in games. And it's interesting in regards to both, because the answer is kind of the same, and the answer for both is that they're both kind of important for both. Visuals and gameplay are both pretty important for both, but I think the reasons for why that's the case are very different. So, for instance, if you're talking about entertainment, so something which you will specifically enjoy playing, something like a Mario Kart or a Call of Duty or whatever, some people like that series, of course, whether it's Halo or Zelda or Dark Souls, how much does the actual visuals of the game itself matter towards your enjoyment of the game? Does realism really have a place in gaming in terms of being something that should be the general direction a game should take? Should games take realism as being what they should go for? Is it the graphical power that creates visuals that are believable that's important? Or is it something else? Is it something else that's important in that medium that makes it fun for us to play? And again, it's a meh, kind of a little bit. I think that to an extent that's certainly true. I think that, for instance, we wouldn't want to play everything in terms of Pong anymore, for instance. That's not something that we really want to do as much anymore, because Pong doesn't really represent very much. It can't get across certain ideas that are important towards games in terms of the actual activity of playing them, in terms of the entertainment, because we have to be entertained by what we're seeing on the screen, and that's why visuals are important. Gameplay is important too, because you need to be able to enjoy your interactions with the game, but how it visually represents it is also important, because it's part of the interaction. And that's kind of the whole point. Visuals and gameplay come hand in hand in it. It's the gameplay that can make the visuals interesting, and it's the visuals that can make the gameplay interesting, depending on how you want to look at it. Now, that being said, when we start talking about realism, we're talking about graphics that require more power, perhaps, to make, and in that case, I think it can be a little different. For instance, I would say that sometimes trying to graphically go past the limits to show things that are new can have a very positive effect when they're made, but later on they just aren't graphically interesting anymore, and instead you just kind of have something that looks a little off because it went for realism, and now realism looks different than it does now. I'm trying to think of specific examples. I think a good example is Oblivion. I think that's an excellent example of a game that really tried to push itself visually speaking at the time. And it's funny because both Oblivion and Skyrim came out on the same systems, but they're visually very, very different. Now, in terms of Oblivion, Oblivion I actually have trouble playing because of the visuals, and that's not something that usually matters that much to me. But in a world that's as expansive as it is, and as much as the interactions in the game are kind of spread out in a sense, spread out and a little slow paced, which is fine. I think that the visuals matter in that perspective when they're trying to do realism because it kind of keeps you in the game. But I think Oblivion kind of is on that edge. It was trying to push things at the time, but even a couple of years later, it didn't look right anymore. When you compare it to something like Skyrim, Skyrim is still visually okay today. You can still play it and it's fine. And the interesting thing about that is that they both go for the same thing. They both go for a very beautiful, realistic look. And then you have a game that's on the GameCube, Wind Waker, that at the time was criticized for it being visually cartoony, not very much what it should look like. And then today it's one of those like games that people love to talk about how good it looks. Whereas for Twilight Princess, everybody was complaining about the fact that it didn't look too different when they transitioned it to HD. And although, yes, there are some differences, there's truth to that. And it's kind of that realistic graphical perspective that kind of changes that. Because in terms of how much you can update it, it's harder. Yes, you can update textures and stuff like that, and I don't know enough to really talk about it. But at the same time, the two games are very different. As much as Wind Waker was remastered, it was like, in terms of the changes, I don't think that the overall amount of change was that different from Twilight Princess, and yet overall the perspectives are very different. And that's because of the fact that the art styles are very different, and one focuses on realism, the other one doesn't. So realism can be something that can actually hinder your game in terms of long, and that's important to kind of note. But then, so in terms of the entertainment value, I would say that it matters in the moment, and it matters to make something that's visually interesting and visually fun to play through. But in terms of realism, I think realism can help to push boundaries. I think it can help to improve designs as we go forward. But I don't know if realism is necessarily something that should be prioritized for a game as something that needs to be done to make that game good or interesting. In fact, I think that you can have something that looks very realistic and can be a very bad game. It's even stuff like Undertale, which is not great looking in terms of like I shouldn't say that, it is good looking game, but it's not very powerful, it's not very realistic. It's a style, it's a 16-bit style that's supposed to replicate like Earthbound and old RPGs, and it's still a very fun game to play through, and interesting to play through. And that kind of brings me to the second thing, which is games as a medium. And this is where I think the visuals in gaming is actually going to become more important as we go along. I don't think that the power of systems, personally, I don't think the power of the system is going to matter as much in terms of the visuals anymore, because of just where we are at this point. Things are already starting to look very, very realistic, and I don't think that we need to really push it past that point, in my opinion. But that's me. But kind of more the point on this is that, again, we have something like Undertale, which can use its visuals as a replication of a 16-bit RPG, and in and of itself, because it's like that, that's the whole point. And I'm not going to get too much into it right now because I want to save it for a tips philosophy coming down the line, tips gaming philosophy coming down the line. And that's that the whole point of having that 16-bit style is that it makes you think of the old 16-bit games, and not just for nostalgic reasons, but because of the themes that the game is pushing forward. And in that sense, it's a really important choice of art style. So now we're starting to talk about games as an art form and how that, visually speaking, matters in terms of what it's trying to represent. And that's going to matter, I think, more and more as people become more creative, more experimental with what they're doing with games and how they're showing themes and making gaming into a medium that can actually do things that stuff like books and movies can't. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that goes as we go down the line. So, of course, gameplay still matters in that case because that's actually what matters the most in my opinion, in either case. But gameplay also matters because if we can start to use the visuals and match it with the gameplay to actually push across messages and interesting ways of telling stories that actually involve stories and storytelling that can only be done through games, then I think things start to become interesting, artistically speaking, for gaming in general and for media in general. Anyway, I think I'm going to leave it off there for that topic, but of course you are 100% welcome to continue discussing in the comments. What do you think in terms of games? What do you think about visuals versus gameplay? I know it's a heated debate in general. Just be respectful, of course, in the comments if you're going to debate about it, either with me or with others, and just be open to hearing other people's opinions. That's all I'd really want to say on that. Anyway, see you soon. Bye. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps with the channel, and it's always appreciated. I'm going to leave some links here so you can go check out some other stuff on my channel, or you can always just search the channel. There's lots of stuff for people, playlists, and all that stuff. And so on that note, thank you again. Have a great day, and remember to keep positive.